United States of America is the most powerful nation on earth.
This right now is the greatest country on earth.
From the bustling streets of New York City to Silicon Valley's technological marvels, the United States is a hub of innovation, diversity, and progress. But beneath that facade is a country with a growing social problem: homelessness.
The topic on many California voters' minds is the state's housing crisis. The complex and growing problem of homelessness has now become a political football.
In the once idyllic streets of the USA's most beautiful cities, tents and addicts crowd sidewalks, the stench of human waste hangs thick in the air, and homeless women openly offer sex to passersby. With the body of one missing woman found in a suitcase in a homeless encampment this year, very few know the true morbid darkness that lives deep within these encampments. Let's dive into this and other dark facts of 6 US cities with the most homeless people, and why the situation is worse than ever before. Number 6. Homeless in San Jose. Home to many of the world's most innovative companies, including Apple, Google, and Facebook, San Jose is famous for being a thriving tech epicenter. They say San Jose has something for everyone. However, no one wants to see the harsh divide between the wealthy and the 10,000 poverty-stricken homeless individuals fighting to survive without food, sanitation, and basic necessities. RVs, encampments, tents, filth, trash, and crime have seeped through the city. The city removes encampments from under the San Jose airport's flight path to keep the area clear of birds, trash, or campfire smoke that can become a catastrophic hazard. However, the homeless take their camps elsewhere, and it all starts from scratch. The situation is so dire that a burned body was found in a homeless encampment. The trash, filth, and stench attracts birds, rodents, and dangerous bacteria. But disease is the least of their problems. With homeless families that include women and children, the encampments are notorious for sex crimes, drug use, and violence. The situation keeps getting worse as students complain the homeless stalk them, follow them home. Others say there are needles and other types of trash that line their path to school. An incident was also reported where a child was assaulted by a homeless person while walking past an encampment on their way to school. These complaints were followed by bans on encampments near or around city schools, enforcing a 150-foot buffer zone between the homeless and school children. As for moves to counter the problem, the city says they are working to build basic, dignified shelter, safe parking sites, and more affordable housing. Meanwhile, the city is also among those attempting to criminalize homelessness. But alternate suggestions include providing safe spaces to park RVs and set up camps. However, the homeless don't really want to move, with most appearing committed to their way of life. Crews from the city of San Jose frequently clear homeless encampments, but residents say the homeless spread like ants to cleaner, nicer spaces, destroying that space until they are moved again. Number 5. Homeless in Denver. Denver, famous for art, outdoor recreation, and its historic sites, is facing a homelessness crisis, with the number of people experiencing homelessness increasing in the city and metro area. While half of downtown Denver grows and thrives with condos, the other half is a racket. One has to watch their back in this area, with rising crime, drug use, trash, strung-out addicts, and the smell of urine thick in the air. From 2023 to 2024, Denver's homeless population increased by a whopping 12%. As the amount of unsheltered people in the metro area increased to over 10,000, so did the tents on the streets downtown and encampments in the suburbs. The situation is only aggravated by the tens of thousands of Venezuelan migrants coming into the area. With rising housing costs, many are leaving the state for less expensive areas, with some residents complaining that parts of Denver have become a shithole, with urine and feces on the streets and sidewalks. Residents report seeing a minimum of 3 drug users every day in alleyways, either shooting up or smoking meth, and men groping themselves in public. The crime rate correlates to this rise in poverty and homelessness, with gangs becoming a threat to personal safety and property. As the weather gets colder, desperation grows, and so does the crime. With a decade of warning signs that residents say the city ignored, Denver's homeless situation is projected to continue to get worse. To its credit, Denver has the most homeless service providers of any jurisdiction in the region and the most shelter space. But officials appear ready to admit that their 100 million homeless shelter program was not exactly effective. One method Denver is employing is to fill the homeless community with resources like tents, clean needles, and free showers. While that can certainly be looked at as a humanitarian act by supplying people with the basics to survive, for others, it creates a neighborhood that is continually unsafe, dirty, and rife with the mentally ill. Furthermore, people argue that it creates a situation where taxpayers end up footing the bill for a drug addict to safely shoot up their poison of choice. Number 4. Homeless in San Diego. When you think of San Diego, you imagine pleasant climate and gorgeous beaches, a paradise for locals and tourists. But San Diego's dark side is riddled with filth, trash, and drugs. With over 10,000 homeless, San Diego ranks 4th among U.S. cities with the worst homelessness crisis. Migrants and asylum seekers spilling into the city only make the situation worse, overburdening the shelter system and eating up city resources. The city has also resorted to frequently enforce sidewalk cleanups and camp areas, pushing the homeless from one encampment to another. As a result, poverty-stricken individuals are frequently left packing their meager belongings in garbage bags and finding a new place to sleep. But does the city solve any problems with these camp evictions? Doesn't look like it. The root cause of the issue is the rising housing cost, insufficient and inadequate funding to alleviate health crises and mental health issues, and drug addictions. In San Diego, drug dealers operate at what appears like regular 9-to-5 shifts. Locals report at least 45 overdose deaths per month, with bodies unceremoniously removed from the streets where these people lived and died. The city has also passed anti-homelessness laws which prohibit people from sitting, lying, sleeping, or storing personal property on public property. The laws went into effect on January 1, 2024, and applied to all cities and counties within California. Number 3. Homeless in Seattle. In stark contrast to the wealth and luxury synonymous with this booming tech area, the homeless have surged in Seattle. Once almost invisible and easily ignored, homeless people are now a common sight, with over 14,000 unsheltered homeless in Seattle and King County. Men roam the streets, carrying what is left of their possessions. There are women curled up on benches, addicts in stairwells, and RVs line the roads. It has become a dangerous place, with prostitutes standing on street corners trying to drum up some business, and gunfights becoming the norm. The city says it is making moves to tackle the violent criminal enterprises and commercial sex trade, after one missing woman was also recently found dead in a suitcase at a Seattle homeless encampment. The city frequently spends incredible taxpayer dollars to remove encampments all over the city, but residents say that's an ineffective strategy to fix the problem. The homeless gather their meager belongings and tattered tents to spread into parks, playgrounds, and sidewalks in nice neighborhoods. They move to picturesque hillsides and settle under bridges. As they camp outside businesses, the trash and feces attract rats, and the homeless end up setting fires that cause exponential danger to people's livelihoods. Many say increasing housing prices have aided the problem in getting worse. With a booming tech industry and no robust rent control laws in place, the city saw a significant increase in housing costs. This rise trickles down with evictions and homelessness, as low-income individuals fail to keep up with basic living expenses. That sounds like an obvious cause, but there's another more confusing angle that continuously aggravates this problem. Free tents, free drugs, free money, medical care, the sympathetic agenda of the state's harm control strategies has exploded into a sister crisis, namely more addicts on the streets. Some have started calling Seattle Free-attle, arguing that coddling the drug-addicted homeless by providing needles and sterile places to use drugs is encouraging the crisis rather than helping anyone involved. Residents are getting fed up with the broken system, arguing that free tents, clothing, and food will never motivate these individuals to find a way out of their predicament. Instead, they will dive deeper into the pit of poverty, addiction, and survival sex. The effect of these harm reduction moves and freebies has been disastrous, leading to a rise in property crimes. Of all major U.S. cities, only San Francisco has more property crimes than Seattle. Alongside Seattle, many other cities and towns in Washington have passed laws that make it illegal to sit or lie on sidewalks, sleep in public places, or panhandle. These anti-homeless laws have their critics. In 2022, the state of Washington passed a new law that aimed to counter the criminalization of homelessness. The law, known as the Right-of-Way Safety Initiative, prohibits cities from enforcing anti-homeless laws in areas around highways. The law also requires cities to provide shelter or housing to people living in encampments in these areas. However, neither the anti-homeless laws nor the counter-actions really address the root causes of homelessness, such as poverty, lack of affordable housing, and mental illness. Number 2. Homeless in Los Angeles. New York City and Los Angeles alone account for almost 1/4 of the country's homeless population. The great dilemma at the heart of America is encapsulated by traveling just a few blocks of downtown Los Angeles to the quarter infamously known as Skid Row. Here, you literally take your life in your hands. In Skid Row, hundreds of homeless individuals serve as a display that widens the disparities between the wealthy and the poor. There is no reconciliation of the filthy tent city so close to towering skyscrapers, luxury housing, and multi-million-dollar homes on the hills. Also called the homeless capital of America, this dystopian shantytown of canvas and cardboard is where the crime rate is amongst the highest in the USA and law and order seems non-existent. What local media calls Disneyland for addicts houses one of the largest populations of homeless people in the US. Over 60,000 homeless live outside, defecate in public spaces, and use drugs in front of children. With growing disorder and chaos, it's a stark contrast to multi-million-dollar properties and their residents. The homeless block sidewalks and openly spread filth and drug paraphernalia, also driving away customers for businesses. This effect on businesses is an economic setback that takes money out of taxpayers' pockets, costs city resources, and creates incredible safety issues for residents and business owners. Overall, the city of California has spent over $24 billion on the homeless crisis in the last 5 years alone. But there's the big question. Did it make any difference? In efforts to end the problem, many states in America are getting aggressive about the crisis. Anti-homeless laws are spreading like wildfire, with Los Angeles enforcing one of the strictest anti-homelessness measures. The city is banning camping on the streets, sidewalks, and in parks. However, critics say criminalizing homelessness doesn't actually solve the problem, as it makes it harder for the homeless to get back on their feet. On the other hand, proponents of the new law that prohibits the homeless from sleeping outside say it will increase quality of life for residents by clearing sidewalks and public places. As for the homeless, they want to stay exactly where they are. According to state officials, the homeless want food, clothing, and shelter, but they don't want homes and organized places. They want to be left alone. So the dilemma is, where do their camps go? With millions of taxpayer dollars spent on the homeless every year without any results, one wonders whether this crisis will ever be sliced out. Jonathan from Los Angeles sums it up, saying that there are no fewer homeless, just better funded ones. The question is, in one of the wealthiest cities in the world in the booming economy of California, which would rank 5th globally if it were a country, how did they get it so wrong? Number 1. New York City. For many, New York City is the place where dreams come true. But right now, New York's homeless population is the highest since the worst depression, with latest counts placing New York homeless at over 90,000. Approximately 15.6% of the country's homeless live in New York. Despite efforts by leaders, the dystopian contrast between the ultra-wealthy, who can live wherever they want, and the homeless. Public spaces have become permanent homeless encampments with trash-filled tents, and addicts openly shooting up drugs, drooling on train stations, and yelling at passersby. Every intersection has become a hub for beggars. For homeless women, homelessness is dramatically increasing the risk of becoming the victim of sexual violence. Many homeless women have no choice but to partake in economic survival strategies, such as engaging in sex work that places them at a greater risk of assault. Over the last decade, in an effort to counter the problem, the city has built massive homeless shelters across the 5 New York boroughs. But during the last year, the situation has continued to get worse. As almost 100,000 immigrants from Colombia, Peru, and Venezuela spilled into the city, the homeless have overcrowded New York's shelter systems. The state even resorted to repurposing hotels and buildings, but that was still insufficient to meet the demand. As a result, migrants awaiting housing are joining the homeless on the streets. As for shelters, many call out the issues prevalent in state-provided homeless shelters. Some are called hell on earth, and homeless people say they feel safer on the street than in a shelter. Moreover, state systems that collect data on homeless numbers are constantly criticized for not including a significant part of the homeless population in their count, as some invisible homeless people may be couch surfing, staying with friends or family, or sleeping in hotels or motels. In one of the world's most beloved cities, rising numbers followed by cuts in state support is making the crisis worse. Under the guidance of New York Mayor Eric Adams, several changes were made to criminalize homelessness. City officials outlawed houseless people from sleeping on the city's subway system or riding the trains all night. Adams also ordered police and emergency services to more aggressively hospitalize homeless individuals with mental illnesses. The sinister truth about the cause and the cure to homelessness. Homelessness is not an act of God, but is it a manufactured crisis? In 2023, annual national counts placed the US's homeless at almost 700,000. And this number frequently leaves out the sheltered homeless, ones which are couch surfing or crashing with friends. The catastrophic failures fueling a drug-addicted homeless crisis stem from a blind allegiance to several deceptively named and profoundly damaging strategies. At the top of that list is harm reduction and criminalization. Harm reduction is disguised as an evidence-based solution to substance abuse. Yet in practice, it does little more than enable addicts, providing them with clean drug paraphernalia like fentanyl pipes, sterile needles and kits for taking drugs under the guise of reducing harm. As more drug addicts discover state-funded needles, more seek out these resources by crowding the homeless encampments. Of course, rising housing prices spill more homeless onto the streets, but is there something more sinister at play here? Camp raids, crime, inhabitable shelters. The American government, with its billions of spending on the homeless, appears almost denialist towards its own citizens. The overall picture looks like this. If you thrive in the US, great. But if you regress or go through a difficult situation, you are thrown away. With mammoth amounts of resources being attributed to homelessness initiatives, why isn't any of it making a dent? Homelessness is continuing to rise, so it doesn't take a genius to figure out that America is doing something wrong. Brutal and expensive anti-homeless architecture. For instance, anti-homeless architecture or defensive architecture is an expensive luxury that basically puts a paywall on public spaces. States are pouring millions into ensuring benches can't be slept on and floors can't be rested on. Who relies on these public spaces? Low-income people and people experiencing homelessness. Unfortunately, also disproportionately Black and Indigenous people. Ideas for these structures are becoming increasingly brutal, including spikes placed around fire hydrants in Manhattan, slanted or segmented benches, rocky or uneven pavements, spiked windowsills, awning gaps to allow rain and snow through any possible shelter, curved benches, raised grate covers, fenced grate covers, boulders beneath bridges, grated or spiked pavement, locked benches, sprinklers. In fact, the Metropolitan Transit Authority in New York spent $74 million on installing leaning bars in the subways. It was all part of their $2.8 billion Enhanced Solutions initiative between 2015 and 2019. Then we have Seattle spending $1.1 million to fence off Spokane Street so homeless people cannot access it. In San Jose, officials spent $8.5 million to raid an encampment of the homeless. The real intention of hostile architecture is to keep homeless residents out of sight and out of mind. Americans seem intent on burying their head in the sand rather than addressing the larger issues behind the problem of homelessness in America. Why the homeless don't want us homeless shelters. Everyone loves talking about homeless shelters. But let's dive into why most unsheltered homeless people would rather live in their tattered tents. For one, there aren't enough of those to go around. Secondly, they are crime-ridden places, so disgusting that it's simply uninhabitable. Brian Scott from San Jose was homeless for 5 years. During that time, he slept in a tent with a sleeping bag in the park, bathed with soap, shaved daily, and had freshly laundered clothes. It was rather comfortable, he says, unlike the group homes he lived in for brief moments. Fraught with drugs, and the shared rooms smelling like an awful mixture of body odor, urine and feces. Scott says the awful conditions of these shelters make unsheltered homelessness on street corners and alleyways infinitely more appealing. Instead, Scott says give a homeless person a private, lockable and secure room or dwelling that can't be broken into, and you're on your way to alleviating the problem of homelessness. Otherwise, the preference for most is to stay on the streets, and threats of being dragged to jail sounded like a great idea to Scott. Warmth and free food and a clean jail cell would be a tempting upgrade when one is fighting for survival on the streets. But is it that easy setting up a homeless shelter? A homeless shelter, albeit an under-resourced and bad one, takes a lot of work. First off, everyone is scared of crime and drugs when the homeless shelter is close to their community. People keep arguing that these structures increase local crime rates. But despite these claims, the 102nd Police Precinct, which includes Ozone Park in Queens, New York, saw a 40% drop in non-felony crimes after a new shelter was constructed there. Cases of public order offenses also dropped by about the same amount. The truth is, everyone wants to solve the homeless crisis, but no one wants the homeless in their hood. Criminalization, making homelessness worse. Another strategy of choice to eradicate homelessness appears to be criminalization, with strict homeless laws being enforced in many states. These efforts aren't new, have been practiced for decades, and cost millions of taxpayer dollars. But criminalization is actually making it harder for people to get back on their feet. First off, isn't there a clear moral issue with punishing someone for carrying out life-sustaining activities in public when there are no alternatives? Enforcing encampment sweeps, confiscating personal property, including tents, bedding, clothing, medications, etc., when they barely have any belongings to begin with, is pretty much cruel. People who are already suffering, being punished for suffering. Secondly, it's a flawed idea because you take them to jail, and now they have a criminal record that adds to the already difficult situation of finding employment, getting housing, or being eligible for certain services. If you give them a fine, they can't afford to pay it. So what's a good alternative to criminalization? Alternative moves for state and federal governments. First, robust investment in social housing to ensure security and decent quality of life for the homeless. Second, universal and generous rental assistance for low-income households will prevent thousands of families from becoming homeless in the first place. This move should be solidified further by supporting laws and regulations that prevent undue evictions based on temporary incapacity to make rent. Clearly, US's homeless shelter systems aren't equipped to deal with the scale of the worsening homelessness crisis. But unfortunately, not many want to talk about actual solutions that work. Everybody wants affordable housing for the homeless, so they would leave their community spaces and parks, out of sight and out of mind. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.